just landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good afternoon and good evening. I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to be here and to get into chat, to see people and to see everything growing every week, getting messages from people all over the world. As some of you who follow my work know, this has been a very traumatic week for me, and some of the things that are happening in, unfortunately, the community will be addressed later in the show. But right now I want to say that I am honored to have the two men that I have on the show tonight here, because for me, I am learning that it is really vital to preserve history, to get out and interview people, to see them on film, to be able to do what Barry Greenwood has done, Jan Aldrich, Fran Ridge, Michael Swords, all of these people who have worked tirelessly and sacrificing a lot, sometimes personal relationships, finances. I mean, this is a big endeavor to work to preserve this subject. And right now we are at a time when this subject is being manipulated by people on YouTube who don't know a thing about it, or are doing this to create discontent, or doing this to steer a political or religious agenda. There's so much going on. And right now I encourage all of you who are intelligent listeners to look at Barry Greenwood, to go to the Greenwood archives, to go to NICAP.org, to visit Jan Aldrich and his work. They've all been on the show before, and they are my heroes. They are my mentors, and I am proud that they are teaching me everything they are about historical preservation. Paul Dean, a few years ago, was kind enough to introduce me to a man who has become one of my dearest friends in the world, and his name is Barry Greenwood. You know, I talk about him every chance I get, every lecture I give, every radio show I do. He wrote a book called Clear Intent, and if you don't have that, you need to get it. Everybody who is important in the subject understands the importance of what he did when he wrote that book with Larry Fawcett. I just, and what he does, like I said, with historical preservation is amazing. But through this group of people, I became aware of a man named Tom Tulien who has done work that you need to know about. He has dedicated his life to going around and conducting interviews with people. And they want to get people, researchers who have dedicated their lives to this, they want to get them on record, on film, so so we can preserve their memory and the integrity of their work. Junior Hicks is, as you know, a very important figure here in Utah. I had the pleasure of interviewing him, but if you ever get a chance to see Tom's interview with Junior, it is really one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And I just want to say, Tom, to have you on the show, this is such an honor. And I know you don't usually do this, but wow, I think you're my new hero.
Oh, thanks. Well, I appreciate you asking me.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe what you've done. And I want to talk a little bit about, first of all, how did you get into this?
Oh, well, I don't know. That can be a long story. I got interested in the late 80s, I guess. Actually in the 80s, with the Billy Meyer case. And because I found it fascinating. But, I had no original interest in UFOs per se, but it came out of the fine arts, and what interested me is when I saw some of the photography that the notion that there was an objective intelligence visiting us here intrigued me, and so that kind of got me started. Eventually, I managed to locate the contact notes, in the Meyer case that were published by Wendell Stevens years ago, and so when I was reading through them, something intrigued me about it. I wasn't quite sure what. I thought, well, if this exists, there must be more. And so I was able to contact Wendell Stevens when he was still alive. This was back in the very late 80s. And he suggested I come to a conference in Dusseldorf that was being put on by Michael Hessman at the time. So, I just kind of dropped everything. In 2 weeks, I went over there just because I wanted to see firsthand what this was all about. And that was kind of my beginning, and it's kind of evolved. I like to say I've been around the block a few times with this subject.
I'm sure you've seen some things.
To get away from it. And now, in the last 5 years, I've tried to get away from it because there's other things important in life too.
Right.
But I keep getting kind of drawn back into it for whatever reasons. I'm not quite sure.
Well, it is a fascinating subject, and I think once you have an experience or you sit down with a person who's had a life-changing moment or dedicated their lives, you just get sucked in. And I think because there's so few people, and I can't really think of anybody who has done what you've done with regard to interviewing these people and preserving that history.
Nobody's really. Yeah, well, that started. That I value Jan Aldridge hugely, and Barry as well. They really got me interested back in the early 90s in the history, in UFO history, because, through the 90s, I was producing documentaries on the subject. I produced a whole series of them in the 90s, but they were always, you got to the end of the production and you put it out there and that was it. You never got any response on it. You weren't sure if people were even seeing it. So, I found that it wasn't very satisfying. And so but I still had an interest in the subject. And I happened to be out in Connecticut, and I called up Jan, and I went and we met and talked. And I really, from that day forward, I sort of committed to just focusing on the history, simply because if you spend all your time on the internet looking at this stuff, you'll end up a confused individual. But if you can apply a methodology to studying it, you can learn for yourself. You can convince yourself of whether it's a legitimate phenomenon or not. Convincing others is something else.
Right.
So, but for myself, what I wanted to really understand is what the nature of the phenomenon really is. So, history was a good way of doing that because it allows you to look at the past. Now, the problem is that, in terms of the official documentation, the material that's available for people to examine is the material that has been made available by the authorities that control the narrative. So, you have to be careful with it. You also have to understand the nature of the documents and who created them and why. You have to apply standard historical methodologies to the study. But when you do, the history kind of comes out in a different way. It's almost like you can't look at it topically anymore. But when you get enough understanding, you can read between the lines. You can see what's missing and what should have been done and what wasn't done, and the decisions that were made along the way over decades, for God's sakes. I mean, this has been going on for 70 years, and the official position is the same as it was back in, basically back in 1948, It really hasn't changed, which in and of itself is pretty remarkable if you think about it. Because what other subject can you imagine? You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, something we should know more than we do know. It's what amazes me is the extent of the ignorance around this subject and the success at controlling the narrative by authorities. That's what I've learned from history. I mean, it's a subtle understanding in the sense that you really have to sort of immerse yourself in what's available to study, and then really see what's really revealing are when the Air Force made mistakes and had to make adjustments, to their policies for dealing with the subject. I mean, you see more in the mistakes and reading between the lines than you do in terms of the material that was released, because for the most part, the Blue Book files, which are the case files of the Air Force UFO program, they were created to establish a particular narrative that served their purposes and that allowed them to maintain control over that narrative. And that included congressional inquiries, I mean, that was not just the public, it was the media and congressional inquiries as well. So they've been real successful at doing that over the years.
And I have to say, Barry Greenwood is here, and he's been very quiet. But Barry,
hello, hi, how are you?
Good.
Hello?
And
Yeah,
we can hear you. Yeah, and it's so. Thank you, Barry, for being here.
Well, my phone connection is horrendous. Skype is off. I don't know why. It's just there's all kinds of problems with the phone today.
Well, we're glad that you're here, and I know that both you and Tom have a lot to say about how the government has controlled this issue. What are your thoughts?
Well, the government certainly has been in control of the subject from day one when it first dawned on the American population. I think they've at times done well in doing their job and trying to keep it suppressed and keep it from concerning the population too much, and other times they totally messed up and gave people the suspicion that they had answers and that they were hiding a lot of information. Whether it was justified or not, the impression was there. So do they have information, secrets behind the scenes? Perhaps. I don't know. There's hints of things in the last couple of years by way of the AATIP revelations with these UFO films and some more recent commentary about the Navy changing their UFO reporting policy. So it sounds like they're taking it seriously.
Sounds like.
And so, Tom, since you've immersed yourself, both of you have immersed yourself in this subject, and you've been able to step back and look at this without putting your belief systems on everything, like unfortunately so much of the UFO community does. But I mean, what did you start to see as far as patterns emerging and who was behind it, if you could pin that down?
That's kind of a broad question. I can only speak about my experience, and what has been truly valuable to me, and after meeting with Jan, back in the 90s, it kind of put me on this path, and that is, there's a difference between people who research the subject. I mean, actively, physically leave their homes, go places, talk to people, go to archives, learn the process, understand the nature of those documents, why they're there in the archive, who created them, everything associated with the history of the subject, in a sense. I found the most value, in my experience, was in interviewing people. Because when I started out, I was doing documentaries, and that's a specific type of way of interviewing someone. In a sense, what you're trying to do is find those sound bites, because, you know, film is something of economy. You have to find, you know, you're looking for sound bites, essentially. When I started doing oral history interviews, it's different. Then the information became much more expansive. People had time to sort of talk, and it wasn't about just trying to find those sound bites. And you got a broader sense of who the person was. But, you know, over the years, since '99, I've shot, well, within the Sign Oral History Project, we've done over, you know, well over 100. I think it's 130 or 40 interviews. And I still have a lot of interviews from the earlier days that I intend to incorporate into the project too. But I guess the point is that, you know, I listen to other people's perspectives on this subject, and I realize that my perspective is distinctly different. And there's a reason, and the reason is because I actually went out there and talked to these people, you know, and once you do that, you realize, I mean, you just, and then it's personal, you know, for yourself, you realize, you know, the validity of the subject, you know what I mean? There's something going on, you know. I mean, so anyway, the point is that I think there's a real distinction between people who actually are involved in doing the research and having to produce something like writing an article, which forces you to really think about what you're saying and really kind of evolve your thinking as you write it. That's a different process than from what you generally see on the internet, which really only ends up in a sort of confusion. That existed back when I got started out too. It was much more confusing back in the 80s and 90s, you know. And it was the same. You had to actually go out there to find that out. But it's no different now than it was then, essentially, you know. It's just louder now because the internet makes it easier to access.
And that's a really interesting point.
Did I answer your question? I might have missed your question.
No. That was great. I know it was a broad question, but I mean, and it's true. And I think for me, because I've been in this subject a fraction of the time that both of you have. I mean, I'm just from when I started to now, I'm seeing a lot more chaos than there was when I publicly became involved in this field. And, you know, so it's I don't know, and maybe that's just my perspective in the way that I'm dealing with this more in a public front instead of doing what you guys do, which is keep your head
your approach
low.
is different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then just do the work and get in there and interview people and do what Barry does and get all of the archives from people and scan them with, you know, Jan and get them so they won't be destroyed. And so it's all different.
I mean, here's another perspective, is that, you know, back in '99 we formed a workshop in Chicago and, you know, got a lot of historians who'd been involved in this subject for years, like people like Richard Hall and, you know, Mike Swords and many others. And, you know, we hoped we could kind of form a thing. But, you know, what struck me at the time, it was kind of like, holy cow, the history itself is so robust. You know, it's so interesting. There are so many interesting people in it. It's so profound in a way that it just blew my mind that there were no historians, no academic historians that had any interest at all in it. None. How the hell did that? I mean, how did it's just, why wouldn't historians, for God's sakes, I mean, there was a period of time when sociologists would write about it. They wouldn't write about UFO cases or anything. They'd write about sort of how people responded to the phenomenon. There's a number of books, academic style books like that. But I think it's only in the last few years where historians are sort of starting to step up. You see a number of academics at the University of Pennsylvania and Penn State, that are actively publishing on the subject now. So I think that'll change, but it's been a long time,
And Tom, you might want to mention some of the people who you've interviewed over the years. I'm sure some of them will be recognized.
Here's the thing: is I got all these interviews, but it's like, holy cow! I mean, it's not easy to go back. I mean, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of hours of material, and it's like you never really get a chance to go back and look at it. But I had an opportunity recently because James Fox is working on a documentary right now, and they needed a couple of the interviews that I shot with people who are deceased now, and that happened to be Al Chop and William Nash. The Nash Fortenberry sighting in July '52, and Al Chop was the worked for Project Blue Book. He was the Pentagon liaison officer, basically, the PIO, Public Information Officer at the Pentagon for Public Blue Book. He dealt with Donald Kehoe and Bob Gino for the Life article, and that whole time he was involved for a number of years. I mean, a great guy. And those two interviews. I mean, those. So anyway, I recently digitized them for James, and went out and saw him put them into the film, and that was really rewarding because I haven't seen that. You see, most of my interviews are here at home, and it's like there's too much to look at. But it was really nice to go back.
Oh, that is so cool! And I've got to cut you off right there because I love James, and I'm happy to hear this. This is fantastic. I'm Erica Lukes here with Barry Greenwood and Tom Tulien. We'll take a break, and the best is yet to come. Libertas, that was just for you.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified. UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Toxins are everywhere, from the air we breathe to the food we eat and the water we drink. In a world where 80,000 known toxins and heavy metals threaten our very existence, how are you going to protect yourself and your loved ones? Introducing Pure Body Extra Strength, the world's first colloidal zeolite that helps trap and remove toxins as well as heavy metals from your body that are messing with your memory, clarity, sleep, and focus. Don't just take our word for it or the testimonials from our thousands of happy customers. Check out the hundreds of articles and case studies on the National Institute of Health website proving zeolite's powerful ability to remove toxins. For a limited time, listeners to KCOR will receive 10% off their first order. To get started, go to trypurebody.com and enter promo code RADIO10. Again, that's trypurebody.com. Toxic junk is all around us, but now you can take back control of your health and protect yourself by detoxing with Pure Body Extra Strength. You'll be on your way to sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and feeling more energetic. Go to trypurebody.com right now and get started today.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
In the shadows, a voice cries out. Evidence that you're not alone.
You said my name. What is your name?
Proof that the living and the dead coexist. Or do they? Every Wednesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, Join writer, producer, and paranormal investigator Greg Bakken on Ghost Box Radio as he explores, interviews, and investigates evidence alongside some of the best in the paranormal community and beyond.
6 people killed.
Ghost Box Radio, Wednesday nights exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, because the dead don't sleep. Ghost Box Radio.
The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Make a note of it. It's great!
What is our reality? An ever-evolving concept? An individual experience? Or just life? Tune in Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern for Our Reality, hosted by Violetta Vrankovich.
You guys ready for this?
Come join the movement each and every week as we explore a range of topics, from the ordinary to the extraordinary. Violetta will emerge your consciousness with unique concepts and guests, taking you to places no other show has ever dared to go.
Carefully designed to stimulate the mind.
Our Reality, hosted by Violetta Vrankovich. Live Saturdays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Our Reality. Changing the world, one topic at a time. At a time. At a time. At a time. At a time.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts!
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back. I'm Erica Lukes again. Always happy to be here. And if you like the show, I have set up a Patreon link so you can support that. This is a listener-supported show. You can go to UFOclassified.com to do that. And as both of my guests this evening know, this subject, archiving, going out, conducting interviews, this is a labor of love and then some. And so I want to just say I commend both of you. I'm here with Barry Greenwood and Tom Tulien, who are my heroes, and I'm happy to have Tom on the show because he doesn't usually do interviews, and we can learn a great deal from him about how to look at the subject and also to understand the people involved. And you can go to a wonderful website, which is, and I will post this, sohp.us. You can go sign Oral History Project to look at the people involved. Jan Aldrich was involved in all of this, and back in May 1999, a Sign Historical Group, researchers, writers, historians, convened in Chicago. We were talking about that before we went to the break. And so, Tom, continue talking a little bit about what happened with that.
Well, I mean, people can go online to either Jan's website, project47.com, project1947.com, and we published a proceedings from that conference, from that workshop. It really was just a workshop. That's available online if you search it. So you'll find it somewhere. It's out there. But so that'll give you a better idea of what we were thinking at the time. There's a lot of information in that proceedings. It's tough to create a UFO organization, especially back in those days, because everything takes money. And the other thing is that people who are involved in the subject are pretty independent. And it's like, try creating an organ. And the other thing is this: if you really want that organization to have an impact, to actually be involved in the discussion, it needs to be associated with a larger historical organization, such as, well, at the time we were hoping we could associate it with SHOT, which was the Society of Historical of Technology. I'm getting that wrong, but it was sort of a larger historical organization that meets once a year and incorporates academics from across a number of fields. But the point is that you could actually sort of bring a subject to one of those conferences and set up a separate room, and anybody who's interested could come in and be involved, and you kind of grow the organization that way. But the problem is that it requires PhDs. The world of academia requires certain credentials to be able to function. So, and the problem is that there are only a few PhDs involved. A lot of the people that are involved don't have PhDs. So, the idea of doing that, and the lack of funds, because at some point that becomes really the deciding issue. And once you involve money into an organization like that, you got that problem to deal with too. So, the whole point, I guess the point I'm making is that though we were inspired to create, some type of an organization that could, interest historians in the subject, it wasn't something that could be easily achieved. And it really needed somebody to kind of, whatever. It's like any organization. I mean, that's a tough thing to crack and to create and then to maintain over years and so forth. So, and the amount of people that had an interest in it back in 1999 amounted to, the people that showed up at the conference. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, it didn't extend out into the academic community. So, so I guess, we had high hopes that something would evolve out of the effort, but, it didn't become a reality in that sense. And now that's not true, because out of that, I started the Sign Oral History Project, and other people, really Jan and other people have still continued to kind of, we've still been working within that format. It's just not within a sort of a structured organization.
And so
it's the first time. Here's the thing. Here's something people don't understand. Generally, don't understand. In 1947, the Roswell incident was a couple of national newspaper headlines, and that was the end of it. It really had no impact on the history of the phenomenon, right? At the time, it played no significant role. It didn't change the course of any dialogue or the narrative or anything. It had nothing to do with anything at the time. It didn't become a historical issue until the 90s, after Moore's book and Friedman's book and so forth. All those books are published. I mean, when, from a historical point of view, when people talk about Roswell, it's like, well, it really has nothing to do with the UFO history. It's just another event within the history. But it had a lot to do with people's perceptions of what the history are, but not until 50 years later.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, I mean, that's, if you study this phenomenon and you were there in the 80s and 90s and you saw this stuff happening, you have a different perspective on it.
Right.
Yeah. I was there in the 60s and 70s, and
when did you begin?
Really wasn't a big issue.
Barry, when did you begin? No, it was nothing.
I first became involved in the subject in 1964, and I don't think I had heard of Roswell until 1967, when Look magazine published a special issue on the heels of the big mid-60s waves that were going on. And there was, I think it was a single picture of Irving Newton posing with this wreckage, and it was in the IFO section. And I looked at it and I said, "Gee, I never heard of that before." And I made a mental note of it, but it never became an issue again until almost
Moore's
1980.
Book. Moore's book was published. Yeah.
Right. So it
Moore.
had like two phases of popularity. One was only lasted a couple of days, and the second has gone on for decades now.
But the idea of that is that the reintroduction of it into the history was made by William Moore.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think the very first that surfaced was Jesse Marcel telling someone who was associated with a radio station, and then he told Stan Friedman, who was doing a show for the station, and then Stan went to visit.
Stan was down there at the time. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And then Marcel came up, and then Stan ran with it.
Right.
And really, and then Kevin Randall and Schmidt, published their books, and it was off and running.
Well, you had that huge wave of interest in the subject in 1997, and that was primarily due to Roswell and the 50th anniversary. It wasn't based upon a sighting wave in any way.
Yeah, it wasn't really based on anything much.
No, just publicity. It was based on a party.
It was a journalistic success,
Well, it forced the Air Force to come out of its cocoon at the time.
Well, yeah.
And comment on both bodies and debris, and they issued several reports. Yeah.
And, there were missed opportunities there, too, right? I mean, all that investigation done by McAndrew. I mean, it's like, where the hell did that go, I'd like to see that. I'd like to see all his,
I recall Amazon selling a large set of DVDs, and apparently it was the video information that they had collected for the Air Force.
Oh. Wow.
And I don't know if they're still available, but I ordered them up, and I think there were only maybe one or two discs that you couldn't get because they were loaded with network TV programs that couldn't be sold openly. But the National Archives had copies of them.
I mean, Barry, have you talked on this show about, cause and the publication of your book? Have you?
Oh yeah. No, when I first went on, we talked about the book and all, and
right.
I touched on cause, but not in a huge way. I had it for about 14 years, and we were trying to be correct about the history of the subject and the Air Force's involvement in government documents and all. The involvement with cause was mainly to update Clear Intent.
Right.
We did the book, and then I had asked Peter Gersten about reviving the newsletter he did in Cause, because that would be a convenient way to report on new developments rather than wait for another book. And that's what happened. But unfortunately, things came along like MJ-12, which I felt was
blew it off.
So I had to spend a lot of time researching it, and I came to very negative conclusions, and that caused trouble with a lot of ufologists who wanted to think that was real.
Yeah, well, they had the same thing in Europe with UMO,
Yeah, but that was much earlier.
I mean, that blew all the European researchers apart,
Yeah, well,
same thing.
That came out in 1968.
Very successful. Yeah.
So will you talk a little bit about that?
UMO?
Yes.
God, no, I'm not talking about
that.
Well,
Barry probably knows more than I do. Let Barry do it.
At least you're honest.
Too much because it was a European event,
okay.
But I remember it surfacing in an issue of Flying Saucer Review in 68, I believe, 1968, and they had these spectacular cover pictures and inside of a flying saucer. I mean, it looked like two soup bowls together lip to lip, and there was a strange emblem underneath.
With a Socorro-looking emblem, yeah.
Yeah. People compared it to a letter in the Cyrillic alphabet. These Russians or whatever, and the pictures were published, and there was a lot of controversy over it, but later there were rumblings that the source of the pictures, the source wasn't all that reliable. I think one was a person who wanted to be unnamed, and another person who was supposed to be an independent observer used a pseudonym. That's not a great way to get credibility for your story, but in time, the story just gradually deteriorated until it was discovered that it was all based on sort of a cultish belief that was being fostered by people at the time.
It was some intelligence project, run by somebody in Europe, maybe in Spain. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think we'll ever know.
That's the history of the subject. Right. It seems to be periods of news followed by strange, weird developments that kind of interrupt the seriousness of it.
Yeah.
But there are. And Barry, you and I have talked extensively about this, and I mentioned this on an interview I did last night. But when I look at my archive and I go through some of the periodicals that I have, dating back from the 40s, you look at who is placing advertisements in some of these things. These are people with very strong political beliefs and religious.
That was more prevalent in the early days. Yeah. That was very prevalent in the 50s and 60s, It kind of went away in the 70s, but then, then the abduction phenomenon took over.
And so
when the subject started in 1947, it was some sort of taken seriously for a few years, but then
I think it was taken pretty seriously through the 50s, really.
Yeah,
not from the Air Force, but from the journalistic point of view, it certainly was. Up until the end of the 50s.
When it was really hot in 1952.
Those are the golden years,
Right.
Yeah.
But after that, you had, I think it was in late 52 that George Adamski surfaced.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a very noticeable downslide in the seriousness of the subject, and also the rise of the contactees, where they, from about 53 on, they grew in such, getting such attention that much of the late 50s were almost exclusively about them, and they pushed everything out of the news. And that lasted, and then finally, I think their wave had crested in the late 50s, and there was sort of what Dick Hall used to call a dark age between 1960 and 63.
Yeah.
And there wasn't much going on.
They call it a dark age, but Lauren, Jantok Lauren into publishing, those last three early years of 60, 61, 60, 61, 62, 63, 61, 62. And it's like, when you read those books, you realize nothing had changed.
Yeah.
I find that interesting,
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, though. The Dark Age was apparent more or less publicly or journalistically rather than in reality with a serious drop-off in sightings. There were more sightings.
Journalism
it was
set
just
the tone,
Yeah, it was cranking along just like other years, but they weren't getting into the papers as much, and the press wasn't showing all that much interest.
We were leaving the 50s. We were leaving that repressive 50s area, and we're moving into the 60s. All of a sudden we've got, a Catholic president. The social reality of that time sort of played a larger role than the things going on in the background. But how it blew apart in the mid-60s. That is one of the most incredible waves of sighting, from 66 and 67. Holy shit. Into 68, too,
Well, when I went out to
and then again in the 70s. So,
NICAP's files were, there was feet worth of records piled up between 65 and 67. I counted
it was amazing.
Over a dozen drawers.
It was amazing what was going on. Yeah, nobody pays much attention to that. I mean, obviously Dick Hall published a book on it finally, or before he passed, you know what I mean? But really that's sort of a forgotten time, until you get to 66 actually with the Michigan sightings, and then you see a shift in official policy as a result of that case,
It is funny too, because I don't know what in particular about the Michigan sightings then were that noteworthy.
Because Gerald Ford got involved.
Yeah. There was another personality wave more than the sighting wave.
Wait a second here. This is not right. My constituent, I have to respond to my constituents here, and they're demanding something from me. So I want you guys to do something about it, and they did. But see, they had already been prepped by Hynek and by, they already knew that, with, Hynek was leaving. They knew that. They had that, they must have known that he wasn't going to sort of fall in line anymore. And so, they were going, now we got a problem. We got a scientific consultant who we don't have control over. But, Hynek stayed within the framework, and he said, look, we need to send this to a private university to study. Now think about that. Think about that. A scientific director, for a project that's supposed to be doing science, saying, oh, actually, because in a sense, the subtext is, oh, there's no science going on here. What we really need is somebody who does science to look at this. That says it all to me. The fact that they had to hire a condon, but beginning with the O'Brien committee, that was a great committee. Had they followed the recommendations of the O'Brien committee, holy cow, we'd be in a different place these days.
Yeah,
they weren't ready to let it go.
Had a lot more say at the time too. That's why the committee never was able to proceed.
Yeah, I know.
They were going against the tide of officialdom at the time.
So I have to go back, because a lot of the people that are listening are not, and I love hearing this, but a lot of people aren't, we're all learning the history of the subject and some of these important things. And then we've people that are new to this you get a lot of
You shouldn't let Barry and I talk.
Oh, I love it though.
You should have questions.
No, I love it, and it's fantastic. But go back to that initial sighting, and tell us what happened with that.
What initial sighting?
Well, so back in Michigan.
Oh well, that was the Dexter Hillsdale situation where, over a period of days, the police were chasing these things around the area for days. All the local deputies there were just chasing down UFOs and reporting them, and it was a big deal. It went on for days. And then towards the end of that, it moved over to Hillsdale. Well, Hillsdale was a girls' college at the time. And this thing, there was a UFO right outside their dorm windows, and it's like, I don't know how many. I don't know, Barry. I don't remember the number. Like 50 of these co-heads all watched this thing for a period of time. It was a period of time, and it's like, anyway. So and then all these people that had these are deputies that were reporting this. These weren't, Anyway, so all those those reports got back to their representative in Congress, Gerald Ford, and he, approached, I can't remember the committee he approached, but he requested a congressional hearing on the subject, as a result, because he was responding to his constituents' requests, And that really was the point. That was the turning point in the Air Force position on UFOs. That turned the whole history at that point. Because after that, you ended up with it evolved into the Condon report and sort of the end of the Air Force involvement in it. At that point, they realized we just got to get the hell out of this thing. Now is the time. Let's get out of this.
One of the common features with the Michigan sightings was that many of the witnesses had seen the objects they had spotted in swampy areas, and that caused Alan Hynek and the Air Force to speculate, well, maybe it's swamp gas. The gas tends to ignite and light up in these areas, and Michigan was full of these spots.
And Hynek, that almost destroyed Hynek's career. I mean, for God's sakes, I mean, it was even Time Magazine was making fun of his conclusions, you know. I mean, it was across the board. Nobody accepted that.
You should see
so the Air Force knew they had a problem. They had
to
get out. Yeah. Anyway, Erica, sorry, I don't know. You got two of the wrong people here. If you get us together, we're just going to talk to each other, I'm afraid.
Well, you know what? And so I think we need to get Barry out to LA, and then I can sit there and operate the camera and interview you and Jan and Gordon and Barry, and I think that would be the spectacular.
Good luck getting him out of Stoneham.
Yeah.
Which, and I have to just say that, you know, I'm very excited. I get to meet you, Tom, and Jan next month, and Gordon, and we're going to be out in LA, and this will be one of the highlights of my life. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward
now wait a minute, Tom. I spent 5 weeks out at Gufos over the last 2 years, so I did get out of town.
Yeah, you did. You should have called me. I would have come down and hung out for a couple of days.
Oh, I love it. I hear that music, so we're going to take a quick break, and
okay.
We will be back. I'm here with Tom Tulien and Barry Greenwood. You can go to UFOclassified.com. We'll be posting information on how to make sure you're going to their archives, seeing the interviews, and learning history like we should be learning it, not from YouTube. All right, we'll catch you on the other side of the break.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at UFOclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Welcome back to the second half of UFO Classified. Again, I'm always happy to be here and to get into chat and to see all of you who support the show and who honestly want good information. You want to learn about history and you want to look at this from a very objective viewpoint. We are not finding that right now anywhere out there, in especially social media. And as some of you know who follow me, there have been things that have happened as of late that have been very disconcerting to me, to many people that are associating with me. We've received threats on air we've taken this very seriously, and I will address that towards the very end of the show because this deserves a mention. And I also want to talk a little bit about people who use credentials or put themselves out there using fake credentials and build up this narrative. We have to be smarter than this. We have to make sure that we are asking people to verify their credentials. And when they build up a narrative for years and then all of a sudden go online and change their bio, and lo and behold, you can't find that, we need to make sure that we're a little more intelligent than that. And perhaps I will ask both of our guests this evening to weigh in on what to look for with regard to fraudulent behavior, because this is a learning process for all of us. But right now I am here with Barry Greenwood and Tom Tulien. Both of them are important to preserving the history. And as you heard in the first hour, people aren't taking this, historians are not taking this subject seriously. And so you've got Barry and Tom specifically, who is doing an incredible job with oral histories and the interviews that he has done with Dr. Frank Salisbury. I am jealous. I've got to talk to you more about that sometime, invite you back on the show, and all of the people that you've dealt with. And James Fox is using some of your clips. I mean, first of all, I want to express my gratitude for both of you being here, and listening to the dialogue between both of you and just being a fly on the wall is really a cool thing for all of us.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I mean, we're going and we're talking about a lot of different things, but the sightings that were taking place, and then I know that there was a particular thing that happened in '68, and I would love to go into that because, Tom, that's really your baby.
Yeah, it was for a long time, for 10 years, really. I mean, not consistently over 10 years, but it took 10 years to complete it,
So give us the background.
What do you want to know?
I
don't know. It would take more than 2 hours to. I mean, once you get me started on the Minot case, I will have a hard time stopping. So, I mean, I think I need to kind of just pull back and go, well, I mean, I'll just hit a few points. I mean, here's the sort of the summary, it's kind of just an abstract, and that is that, so it was late October, 1968. This is at Minot Air Force Base. Minot Air Force Base is a dual wing base. In other words, they have 150 nuclear missiles there, ICBM, Minuteman, underground. They can launch 150 missiles if they want to. There was also, because it was a dual wing, they also had B-52 bombers there with nuclear capabilities that could fly into Russia and had targeting information to drop nuclear bombs at specific targets. They also had, at the end of the runway, they always had a B-52 ready to take off, hot, in case it had to. If Russia were to release missiles, that airplane would take to the skies, and it would stay in the skies, and it would become a remote command post for SAC officers. So Minot was, at the time, a unique situation. It was, besides Malmstrom, it was the only other base with those capabilities that were fully functional. It was, front line of the Cold War in the 60s. But anyway, so on that evening, I'm going to go quick now. 14 witnesses, all security personnel in the, working in the missile fields, were reporting a UFO, very large UFO, very bright UFO, moving around. That happened over about an hour's worth of time. But at that time, at about 3 a.m., a B-52 returned to the Minot area from a combat mission after 10 hours airborne. And the local radar, the Radar Approach Control, RAPCON, asked them to be on the lookout. Well, when they were 40 miles northwest of the air base, this object appeared on the radar. They were actually notified by RAPCON that it was at a specific location. They changed the settings on their radar. They had it there at 3 miles co-altitude at 20,000 feet. As they made this wide turn around, I mean, people have to understand that it's like a B-52 is not an airplane. Not in the sense that, I mean, in order to turn a B-52 around 180 degrees requires a 6-mile radius. You know, these things lumber through the air. They're huge. If you ever have a chance to see a B-52 take off or land, it is the most incredible sight you'll ever see in your life. I mean, I talked to some of the guys who worked at the air base, and they said every time they saw a B-52 coming in, they'd just stop and stand and just stare at it. It was the most incredible sighting. Anyway, I'll go on forever. Sorry, I'll try and focus this. So anyway, so as they turned, this thing moved out to the northeast, away from them. It allowed them to turn inside of the UFO. And at the end of their turn, it was 3 miles off to their left. So as they started to come back into land to Minot Air Force Base, they just started their descent. This thing moved from 3 miles abeam of the B-52 to 1 mile within one sweep of the radar beam. That is within 3 seconds. In less than 3 seconds, it moved 2 miles. So, I mean, at an incredible speed. But people say, well, it was 3,000 miles an hour. But really, it had to go twice that to reach a peak speed and then reduce its speed. So really, that's just an average speed. So, and then it appeared, so then it moved so the radar operator saw it in one scan of the radar at 3 miles, and in the next scan at 1 mile. I mean, he'd never seen anything like that in his life. Scared the hell out of him. You know, they thought they were going to have a collision or something, you know. So, and at that same point that it moved into 1 mile, their radio transmission went dead. They could not transmit on their radios. So they began their, at that point, their protocol is simply to land that aircraft, without communications. So, but they could still hear RAPCON. They simply couldn't transmit back. So, RAPCON verified that they could hear them using their equipment. And then they simply came in. So that thing paced them at 1 mile without any radio transmission for about 4 minutes. And then when it got to about 20 miles from the end of the runway, the object disappeared on radar and the radios came back on. So they didn't see it the whole time because they were flying in clouds that whole period. They couldn't visually see it. So then, they came down and they were doing their normal procedures at that point. Sounds crazy, but that's, they're B-52 pilots. They have one thing to do, and that is to fly that B-52, and that's all they do. So they were doing their procedures, and then someone came over the radio and said, "Don't land. We want you to fly back around and overfly a UFO." So they didn't want to keep going. They were tired of flying. They'd been out for over 10 hours. They wanted to land the aircraft, but they conceded to do that. They flew back around the standard traffic pattern, flew out over the UFO. When they came around one turn on the traffic pattern, they could see the UFO. It was around 10 to 15 miles ahead of them. The pilot described it as a miniature sun on the ground. So they flew towards it, I mean, in the meantime, they're doing their fuel checks and their, whatever they have to do to land that aircraft. They're just going through their checklists and so forth. So they're busy. Then they come up alongside the thing and turn over the top of it. And the co-pilot from the opposite seat is able to look through the pilot's window and see this thing on the ground. And it's huge. It's hundreds of feet. It's a huge egg-shaped object with when they flew next to it, he thought he was seeing a barn or something, at first. Because it was like, why is that in my windows? This thing is, it shouldn't be in our windows. And then as he got up near the front of it, he could see there was this like funny looking bumper on the front of it that was lighted, sort of a greenish color, yellow greenish color. And as they flew around, they turned over the top of the object and were able to look down at the object. So that the co-pilot gives a pretty good description of what he saw. That was in, if people had seen the Peter Jennings ABC documentary back in the early 2000s, they did about a 5-minute piece on the Minot case. I think that's available on YouTube too at places. It's available on my website anyway, which is www.minotd52ufo.com. So that's MINOTD52UFO.com. It's in the introduction section of the website, the clip from Peter Jennings' documentary. That'll give you a better idea of another idea of what was going on. But, and the UFO stayed around for another hour or so. So it was there for over 3 hours. But what's interesting about the Minot case is that in itself is pretty profound. But the investigation went on for 2 weeks. Actually, as long as 3 weeks. SAC Air Force Base, SAC headquarters was involved constantly. And what happened is it's weird. This is in '68. At the time that it happened, they were just finishing the Condon report. In fact, I think the Condon report arrived on the desk of the Secretary of the Air Force on November 1. So this was just, the event occurred a week before. So it was at that time when pretty much Kitmia and the Air Force, they knew that Blue Book was going to be shut down eventually, because as a result of the Condon report. So and at that time, journalists weren't paying any attention to the subject because they were waiting for the Condon report to be published, So it fell in this crack. So nobody really paid too much attention to it over the years. What was nice is when I interviewed all these guys, and I did 30 interviews, and 15 principal witnesses. The guys who were actually there, I interviewed, and the transcripts are on my website of all those interviews. In fact, some of these guys I interviewed twice. I'd come back 3 years later and interview them again, just to see how their story changed. You know what I mean? Or just to kind of try and verify more information for myself. But none of them had talked about it ever since. These were untainted interviews, which is really, really a prize to find. You know what I mean? Because most UFO cases have been, rehashed, and you kind of lose track of what's real and what's not. In this case, I had the opportunity to investigate a case nobody had investigated before, and nobody had talked to any of the witnesses before. Anyway, so this body of oral history I was able to collect, that in itself allowed me to write the narrative of the events. And then there were over 100 pages of Blue Book documents on the case, including communications memos with SAC Special Security Office. That was the intelligence divisions at SAC headquarters. They were interested in it. The SAC commander was interested in it. In fact, they were briefed on this case. So it's interesting from another perspective in the sense that you can look at how they investigated it. There's enough information there where you can look at how it was investigated by the Air Force and the involvement of SAC and get a pretty good idea of what the Air Force attitude was towards this phenomenon. And then beyond that, there were 14 radar scope photographs. So when I first got interested in this case, I was at a MUFON meeting locally here in Minnesota, and one of the state directors, the assistant state director, said, "Oh, well, I have the original radar scope photos from that case." And I'm like, "Yeah, right." I was like, "Well, what are the chances of that?" You know what I mean? So I didn't even pay much attention to it when he told me that, but it was Bill McNuff. But
I
a while later, I called him up. I called him up and went out to his house, and for God's sakes, I mean, his sister had been married to the intelligence officer who did the analysis, the radar scope photo analysis of this case. Wow. And what he had done is he had kept an extra set of radar scope photos. So in other words, he came into work, that next morning at 7:30, and he was told to set aside all his targeting. His normal duties were to target, were targeting issues in Russia and bomb scoring for, the testing of B-52 crews. But in this case, he was told to set that all aside and to look at these photos and determine whether or not the photos matched the testimony they were getting back from the B-52 crew. And when he sent it to the photo guys, he asked for two copies. One was sent up to SAC headquarters in his report, and the other he stuck in his files. It was a desk file, and he kept them. And when he left the Air Force, he was going to throw them away. But his brother-in-law, Bill McNuff, he knew was interested in UFOs, so he asked Bill if he wanted them. And Bill said, "Yeah, I'll take them." And lo and behold, Bill had original first-generation photos of the radar scope aboard the B-52 at the time when the object was making a huge spiral around the B-52. And the point is that, it doesn't stop if you get me going. The radar system on board that B-52 was an ASQ-38 and 68, and it was like state of the art in 68. It was the best anybody had. These things could drop bombs in Russia. They could fly below radar and bomb Russia just based on the imagery they get back on the radar system. In fact, these radar bomb navigators were trained on the terrain. See, they could shoot the radar out ahead of the B-52, and they would see the shapes on the terrain. These guys would train on those shapes so that if the pilot couldn't see where he was going, they could direct the B-52 to its target based on the radar imagery. The system back then was state-of-the-art. I mean, it has nothing. It's not even close to what we got these days. But the point is, with GPS, is that it's the best we had. So what you get with these photographs, they're actually data sets. You can extract quite a bit of data out of the radar scope photos. I mean, you can, in other words, for example, I worked with Claude Perher, who was a French scientist, and he was able to very precisely locate the B-52 in three-dimensional space based on the data in the radar scope photographs. I mean, it's that accurate. It's down to the second. So that allowed us to reconstruct where the B-52 was when they took the photographs. So we knew exactly where that was, and then compare that with the evidence from the documents, which also tell, a story. But we could compare the two to see how well they collaborated with each other. Plus, I had all the information from the interviews that created its own narrative that I could compare against those two sources of information, right? So, I mean, in the end, I was able to reconstruct the case in a very confident manner, I mean, most cases don't give you that level of information to work with. This one just fell through the cracks. I think it's me of those guys. I mean, you don't usually find memos from the records from SAC intelligence officers, for God's sakes, in Blue Book files. In this case, I think they just knew Blue Book was over with and they didn't care. You know what I mean? They just threw all that stuff into the file in the end.
Well, what was Blue Book's conclusion about that story?
Plasma.
I
mean, that's a story in itself. But I mean, you go to my website. I talk about the whole investigation. I recreate the whole investigation and the conclusions and how they arrived at it and everything. So it's all there, and all the information I needed to do that was in the documents. But the point is that his actual letter to SAC, because here's the other thing, he didn't send his report. Kent Nia, Project Blue Book head, didn't send his report through the normal channels. He sent it directly to SAC headquarters, you know, because those guys were like bugging him and saying, "Get this thing over with, you know, come to a conclusion on this." The SAC commander wants to know what the hell's going on, you know. So he sent it to SAC headquarters, and it was this goofy little one-page letter. It goes through a whole litany of explanations for different parts of the sightings. You know, there was a atmospheric anomaly. These guys were seeing the B-52. These guys were seeing celestial objects. They were seeing Venus. You know, they were seeing. I mean, it's like it gives about 5 explanations to cover all aspects of the case. But in the end, see, what people don't understand is that what Blue Book did was they simply categorized sighting reports. That was their job. That's all they did. They didn't investigate. They simply categorized reports.
And we're
so,
going to go to a break, and I hate to cut you off right there. We're going to get ready. I know.
I shouldn't get me started.
But I love this, though, and this is important. So I am Erica Lukes. We're getting ready to take our last break. This is UFO Classified. I love being on KCOR. I'm here with Tom Tulien and Barry Greenwood. We will be right back after the break.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes. The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
Looking for a radio show like no other?
We need something brand new.
Then tune into the KCOR Digital Radio Network, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, and get ready for The Quantum Shift. A great shift of consciousness is sweeping across the Earth. Are you ready for the dimensional shift?
It is amazing, is it not?
The Quantum Shift.
Hosted by Dr. Sam Muggsy, Kent Dunn, and Drake Bailey.
Be part of the 5th dimensional reality, where consciousness prevails and the universal law of one is the only true reality. The Quantum Shift. Live Tuesdays, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Vegas, baby! Vegas' #1 source for talk and new music.
How cool is that? Alien Deceptions, a suspenseful sci-fi romance thriller by Tina Marie, featuring the tantalizing Erica Jones and the mysterious Russell Hamilton. An out-of-this-world book of fiction based on years of document facts and files the government does not want you to know about. At least, not yet. Alien Deceptions by Tina Marie. Available now at Amazon.com or get a signed copy at TinaMarieEntertainment.com. Get your copy now.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
1, 2, 3, 4!
to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
I love the way it sounds. Love the music. I listen all day.
The future of radio is here and now.
There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix. The Paradigm Matrix. Hosted by Willie Miranda. Every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole. The Paradigm Matrix explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide.
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back, and whether you know it or not, tonight is a very important night, and we will remember this, well, hopefully for a long, long time, because I'm here with Tom Tulien, who doesn't usually do interviews, who has done extensive research, and he's also contributed to preserving the integrity of the subject by interviewing people who we don't have on the record. Dr. Frank Salisbury is one of my heroes here in Utah. I went up to the University of Utah. Oh my God! And
love that man.
Oh, and I have to. I know that we've got an important case that you're talking about, but I wanted to talk about him after you wrap this up because I spent several days at the Special Archives at the University of Utah just digging through his files, and that was a very profound thing for me. But we'll get into that. I'm here with Barry Greenwood, my mentor and BFF. But finish what you were saying about this case because this is incredible.
I'll tell listeners they have a couple options, and that is if they go to my oral history site, which is sohp.us. On that home page, there's a link at the bottom. It's called 3 Radar UFO Cases, and those were entries that I wrote for Jerry Clark's newest UFO encyclopedia, the 3rd version that was just released this year. Those were, entries for the encyclopedia, and I talk about 3 cases: the Fukuoka case that happened in Japan in '48. I think it's Selfridge was in 1950, and then the Minot case too. Well, I talk about Selfridge, the Selfridge case in 1950, which is a remarkable case, and I talk about 3 remarkable cases: the Lakenheath Bentwaters, which, in the early 2000s, a number of witnesses were located, the pilots for that case. I was able to tell it in a way that's never been told before, most complete, based on what evidence is available. And then I write about the Minot case. So there's a pretty good summary of it there, sort of an encyclopedic entry. And I actually, in this instance, I talked about some of the evidence that can be extracted from the photos, the B-52 radar scope photos at the end of the article. That was the work done by Claude Poher. Claude Poher was he was a French space scientist throughout the 60s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, 80s, 90s. retired with honors, was also the head of GPAN, which was the first, the government-sponsored UFO investigatory committee that was associated with, I can't remember the French acronyms for that stuff, but the point is that he started the first investigation of UFOs that was supported by the government back in, when did that start, Barry? In the 70s, right? 76 or something like that?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so Claude is a very interesting person, to say the least. I mean, he doesn't want to talk about UFOs anymore. He convinced himself of what was going on, and he has spent the last 20 years of his life, 30, looking at how these things are powered, how they do what they do. That has been his focus and his primary interest for the past 30 years. He's published a slew of articles on his theories in academic publications. He's filed a number of patents on devices that he's developed. He's had those devices tested in laboratories, and he's actually worked with NASA for a period of time, who down in Huntsville, who was interested in his work and took it on as a project for a short period of time, but then the funding ran out and they stopped. So, Claude's interesting in the sense that he was a type of personality that said, well, now I know this phenomenon's real and these things are devices. I want to know how they fly. And he spent the rest of his life focused on that. So I was really... the only reason he got interested in Minot was because it fit his theories. He could explain it in terms of the types of things he was developing. So, anyway, I mean, so what's the nature of these things? I mean, there's one thing that we know about UFOs. Olbert, the German scientist back in the 50s was talking about this, and Paul Hill talks about it. McCampbell talks about it. I mean, there's a plasma effect with some of these objects. You know what I mean? Especially with these large egg-shaped objects, where there's an ionization around the outside of the craft. That's why you see the colors change at night. What it's doing is as the frequency changes, it perturbs the gases in the local environment around the craft, and nitrogen burns green, and you know what I mean. They burn just certain colors. You know what I mean. So as that thing sort of accelerates up, it goes through color changes. That's exactly what was seen with the Minot case. I mean, that thing would be this bright white, so bright it would almost blind them to an amber orange, and at other times a green color. That's like very typical for a lot of nocturnal UFO sightings. I mean, the Minot case allowed a means to hypothesize about how that could be happening, and it all relates back to the power generation of the object. Well, in this case, and this is just too crazy, but I mean, Poher, as a space scientist, if you're sending a mass up into space, you have to understand. I mean, there's a lot of things you have to understand. You have to understand spherical trigonometry, for example, or you have to understand mass and what mass certain types of objects have. So as a space scientist, you would study like equipment on Earth, like big bulldozers, and you'd understand sort of the mass of these objects and the type and how much energy would be required to move it and so forth. So, and that's who this guy was. I mean, he came from in space sciences at a time when a space scientist had to know multiple disciplines. Nowadays, everything's specialized, but back then in the 50s and 60s, you had to be really a brilliant guy or girl. Anyway,
it's interesting with mine that 11 years before that, you had Loveland, Texas.
Exactly.
Where people
in fact, for that
were reporting large objects.
50s to the late 60s, you're seeing these spherical objects that have electromagnetic effects. So there was a period there where these objects were prevalent. Up until 68, at least. Maybe beyond, I don't know,
So,
and the Air Force felt that Loveland was an example of plasmas as well.
And
then you got Stokes too, James Stokes. I mean, that's an incredible sighting report,
And I have to say clearly, you two need to be on the show again. And when I go to LA and I meet you, I will sit behind your camera and video you and film you. I mean, thank you. And I want to go down because of some of the things that I've experienced this week, which has been really, really, really traumatic to me. I want to talk a little bit about and get both of your opinions on how to really look at this and know who you're dealing with, because lately we've seen, historically we've seen people who insert themselves into this field to make up credentials, and then just abuses happen. So when you're looking for somebody and you're asking them to verify your credentials, tell us what that means, what people should be looking for.
I can answer that simply, and it's just the quality of the work. I judge a person by the quality of their work. Not what they say, not their opinions, not their, armchair speculations. It's the quality of the work they produce. I mean, how else do you know someone?
And so how do you vet credentials? Like if somebody's coming to you and saying that I
don't vet credentials.
Okay.
It doesn't matter if it's a PhD or somebody who, never been to school. It's like it's quality of the work they produce.
Okay.
That's true in everything, isn't it?
Right.
It applies here.
Yeah, I think you look for the common sense in what people are saying, and if anyone draws hard conclusions about the origin and nature of the phenomenon, you should doubt it, because it's almost certain that they don't know.
Well, the phenomenon exists. I mean,
absolutely.
Even skeptics admit that. I mean, that's not the question. The question is what is the nature of it?
And so for me, and just to say, and Barry knows, and Tom, you haven't been brought up to speed, but in last week there was a YouTube show that was done specifically to attack me, where my life was threatened on this show, and where other people that I know and care about were targeted and bullied and abused. And I think that it's a really interesting time right now. And so I want to teach people who are getting into this subject to learn when people are inserting themselves in the narrative and you can't verify who they are, they're a ghost. And when they're trying to steer the narrative or create discontent or do these things, that there are certain things we should do to be diligent and educated to make sure that we're not getting led down an unproductive path, a dangerous path.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has been going on forever in the subject, but I think it's
exactly.
More
this
pronounced.
Is nothing new.
It's more pronounced.
We all learned Barry and I learned a lesson years ago, so this is nothing new to us.
And so what would you say for people, because recently there has been a person who's inserted themselves into the field and for the past few years has claimed that they were with the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, a NASA scientist, a biomechanical engineer. Claims that have, according to a lot of different people who have looked very heavily into that background, could not be substantiated. And there are a lot of great people in this subject who want to know more, and they're falling into the trap of not checking people's credentials out. And I think that's really pivotal. Barry, what do you think about that?
Well, Yeah, I mean, it's vital that people's qualifications and credentials are verified and all. If they can't be verified, then they don't belong doing what they're doing or trying to do what they're doing. I think I know who you're referring to, and I know that with MUFON, for example, I have a long history with them going back to the 80s. I had actually resigned in 1987 because of just strange things the organization was doing, and it was in the midst of the Gulf Breeze, MJ-12 topics running amok, and I didn't like what was going on. It seemed as if the MUFON organization was trying to create the seeds for its destruction at the time.
Yeah, it was
much
dark,
too committed. It was much too committed to hard belief and much less to, I thought, science. And I left, and over the years, I've watched it from the outside, and it only seems to have gotten worse. And in more recent times, some of the people involved with MUFON have been saying things which I don't think really belong in the subject anymore. Assertions about what the phenomenon is that just amount to opinion rather than anything based on fact.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a lot of opinions out there.
Right. And so, Tom, I mean, you obviously, both of you have seen this kind of thing happen, time and time again, where you've got people who are.
There's always a wealthy individual in the background who wants to do good. This goes back to, remember the Prince of Liechtenstein theory?
Yes.
Or
I do.
Or Joe Firmage, or Bob Bigelow, or now it's Tom DeLonge, or there's a whole series of these guys. You know what I mean? And I get it, but when it comes down to it, like Firmage is a perfect example. I mean, he had his own expectations of what he expected out of this. So he would support things that supported his point of view, but not support things that didn't. Instead of going to the people that know and asking, what is it I should be doing? These are rich people who made it on their own. They're not used to asking other people for advice. So they come to it with this expectation that they already know what the answer is. They just they want people to justify it for them. And it's like, that's been consistent throughout. You just don't pay a lot of attention to that stuff because it doesn't really mean anything, and it just goes away eventually.
And so people, I mean, and I agree.
But people get caught up in it as though it's something, and it's nothing,
But and that's true, and I think for me it's unfortunate because there are a lot of good people out there looking for information, and when you look at the Firmages and you look at the different things that are going on, or people with regard to this whatever this YouTube channel is, and you're right, there's money behind that, and there's somebody back there that's like a puppet master.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you're not people, following science as much as you are following someone's agenda.
That's what I say. I judge people based on their work. What I can objectively assess to come up with an idea of what that person's point of view is. That's academia. I mean, that's how it works in academia as well. What you publish is who you are. So, that applies here. If you're looking for a way to separate the junk from the work, I mean, you need a methodology to do that. And there are standard methodologies apply here. That's why I use history. History has a methodology. You do things a certain way. You have certain standards. You follow those standards, and you can feel pretty confident that what you end up with has some value. to a broad range of people. You know what I mean? If you don't follow any standards, it doesn't matter what you say. It's just your frickin' opinion, you know?
Yeah, in the distant past, you had different organizations with different agendas, and it sort of spread the wealth around about who supports what. Whereas now, you pretty much focused, at least in the United States, on one organization, which is MUFON, and they're more or less dictating what the media hears about the subject. And I'm not sure a lot of that is well-grounded. For example, several years ago, they conducted a whole symposium on the secret space program, which, if you listen to what was said, it's just absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I know.
Why do they do that? Why do they have to present that point of view?
You know, it's sci-fi. It's interesting. It's exciting. It's all that stuff going on. It's just people. You know, I don't blame. I don't blame anyone. I just realize we just live with people who are prone to that. You know.
Well, we spent decades trying to get it out of the realm of sci-fi.
Yeah,
and now it's going back into it.
Yeah, well, that's an easy way to control the narrative. You know what I mean? And that's been very effective. So it'll never go away.
Yeah, I mean, we always had a difficult time getting science taken seriously within the organizations, and especially now it's even worse.
Yeah, that's a problem with public organizations. That's a problem with the subject in a public forum. There's no value.
Yeah, well, it's almost like you have to cater to a belief system rather than do objective research, and there's some perception that objective research just isn't popular, so nobody wants it. They'd rather believe.
Exactly, because you have to actually work to understand people's points of view, and most people don't have that discipline. I get that. You know what I mean? You're just talking about people, right? Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but it does take work, you know?
Yeah. There's just some things that organizational officials have stated publicly that I'm appalled at some of the comments. And there's definitely been a coarsening, a crudity of discourse now between people. Yeah. And this has got to stop, or else the subject will never be taken seriously.
Well, no, it's not meant to be taken seriously. It never will be taken seriously in that sense. That's how I see it. How I see it is that 50 years from now, the technologies will emerge, and it's like everybody will just accept it as being normal, you know? And all this history we're doing, they probably don't want all this history to accumulate, but they can't really stop it either, you know, in a liberal culture, you know. We don't live in a, you know. But the point is that, I mean, here's the point. The point is this, is that nowadays these articles, like in the issues in Science and Technology, the one you sent, Barry, and some of these articles you're seeing journalists write to these days based on, you know, this DOD stuff, you know, and the Tom DeLonge stuff and all that stuff. I mean, the conclusion, it's interesting, the conclusions of these journalists, because they're smart guys. They've been all guys except for Leslie, you know, but and their conclusions are these have to be are, you know, government projects, secret projects. But anybody who understands government or military and how projects are developed within the military and what it takes to do that, and blah blah blah, realizes that it's totally impossible that these could be that these are government secret aircraft. It's just impossible because we'd know about it otherwise. You can't involve thousands and thousands of people and subcontractors and fund it and all this stuff through the government. You know what I mean? Without somebody eventually knowing about it, right? So, but the point is that, so I see this stuff these days, and all these journalists are concluding, oh, these have got to be secret government aircraft. And it's like, without with a total ignorance of the history. It shows a total ignorance of the history of the phenomenon for the past 70 years by making that statement. A total ignorance of what it takes within a government organization to develop a technology that is so profound, it's non-aerodynamic. It is so profound, it generates energy from its local environment. I mean, give me a break. Governments can't do that. Not only that, but if they did, they would be the sovereign power on the earth. You know what I mean?
And isn't that frightening?
I mean, UFOs are a sovereign power.
Right.
That is what they represent. That's what scares the governments. They can't admit that.
Absolutely. And we've got to close the show out. Tom, you've got to come back. I'm grateful to be here with Tom Tulien and Barry Greenwood, my mentor. I will be posting links to their websites, and rest assured I will have both of them back on. I can't wait to go to LA to meet you, Tom, and to meet Jan and Gordon. We're going to have a great time. There's so much to do, and you know, have a wonderful night. Stick around for Willie Miranda. KCOR is the best network on the planet. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you. Catch you next week.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks, Erica.
Absolutely.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a